welcome to another episode of Pray Tell. My name is Tyler Evans.
And I'm Trevor Smale.
We've started this podcast, Pray Tell, just as a way to get together to explore different aspects of the Christian tradition, especially from the Anglican perspective. You and I, we both attend at St. Matthew's Anglican Church in Abbotsford, and we find what the Anglican Church has to offer, I think, pretty compelling. That's the purpose of this podcast. It's designed to be a place to explore and to ask questions and think about the Anglican way in many ways. It's for any and all people who are, whether you're Christians or you consider yourself just not religious but spiritual, coming from different traditions, whatever it is, whether you've been an Anglican for a long time and looking for a bit of just listening to other people talk about what it is that you've experienced so often, people who are maybe new to the Anglican tradition and want to know a little bit more about the ins and outs of it, or people who either come from a different Christian denomination or a different faith background. I think what we talk about here has stuff to offer all those people. Trevor, as part of our little show here, we like to incorporate a local beer. Today we've got an English Toffee Amber Ale from Old Yale Brewing Co. What do you know about Old Yale? What can you tell us about Old Yale?
Old Yale is one of the more established, or at least has been around for quite a while in the Fraser Valley, originally from Chilliwack. They now are in Abbotsford as well. This is a single batch limited release. They do a number of these throughout the year. So this is an English Toffee Amber Ale for the holiday season. It's part of their Trailblazer series. And the description on the back, just to give you an idea, is this is a rich and deep toffee flavor. And it has a taste, it says, it creates a taste of dried fig and pie crust that is further accentuated with just a touch of vanilla.
Wow.
So it says it's truly decadent. It's a truly decadent tiptoe into the realm of darker beer.
Boy, Old Yale certainly has an active marketing campaign.
Yeah.
I applaud them for that.
Yeah.
And let's crack them open and see what we have.
Yeah.
Delicious.
I am pleased to say, after last week's very rich and dessert-like dessert stout, this is a little bit lighter and a little easier to drink. Goes down a little more easy.
Not too strong. I found myself turned off by the very strong hoppy beers. This is kind of very. It says here that under the hops, it has these little hops to measure right here, and it only has 1 out of 5 hops colored white, which I don't think is an official measuring system, but helps.
It's pretty official.
I would put it at more of a 2 or 3, but to each their own in terms of measuring hops. But this is very nice.
Yeah, it's tasty.
Yeah, it's good.
So last week, well, actually going back to week 1 of Advent, we started off with discussing this theme of hope and the anticipation we feel at the start of the Advent season. And then last week we talked about the theme of peace and how do we sense or feel this theme or feeling of peace in our busy lives, especially during this busy time of the year. And we kind of got into this discussion of how we feel that once Christmas actually starts and we're in this actual Christmas season, and we got a little bit ahead of ourselves, maybe based on, the theme of this series we're doing is Advent, but it was really applicable regardless, because we were speaking of that in the context of how Advent helps us to prepare ourselves, our minds, our hearts for this celebration of Christmas that comes, and how we can find peace in different ways for ourselves, for our families. And so this week, we're on the topic of joy. And so we're going to be exploring some readings in the third week of Advent, and how we can and how we do experience joy, and where we see joy in our lives, and how we can maybe apply that.
Yeah, and I think this kind of gets to a bit of the heart of why we're doing this podcast. one of the features of the Anglican tradition is that we have a church year, a church calendar. Advent is the beginning of the church year. It starts us off in a season of preparation for Christmas, and part of that preparation is reflecting on what we get at Christmas, what Jesus brings at the Christmas season, because that is a high point of the church year. It's the coming of Christ to the world, and we use the season of Advent to prepare ourselves using certain themes within the readings that were provided and the services that we experience. And so we've come through the theme of hope, we've come through the theme of peace, and now we're into the theme of joy.
And we want to take a moment before we get too far into our episode here to remind you that our readings will appear on screen for you. So we encourage you to pause before we get into our discussion to take a moment or a few moments to read our 4 passages this week. Mm-hmm. And Tyler, can you talk about where, if they're further interested in finding out more about what we're doing, where they can find out more about what an Anglican church service is even like?
Right. So one of the best ways to do that is just to come to a service. Mm-hmm. The St. Matthew's Anglican Church is located at 2010 Guilford Drive in Abbotsford. There are Anglican churches, part of the Anglican Church of Canada, all over the country, all over the Lower Mainland. There's a church in Chilliwack. There's a church in. Is there more than one in Chilliwack? I think there is more.
Sardis.
I think there's more than one in Chilliwack. So there's a couple there. There's one in Abbotsford. Aldergrove has St. Dunstan's. Langley has multiple, including mm-hmm. St. Andrews. Yeah. And all of these churches are places where people can go and explore mm-hmm. The Anglican tradition. But before we get to the readings, we're going to talk about the candles. What do you got to say about those?
Yeah, so as you may have noticed, we have these 3 purple candles. And then we have this one pink or rose-colored candle that's different. Mm-hmm. So Tyler, can you tell us, why do we have this one different colored candle? I imagine it's not just because we ran out of purple candles and we found a pink one in the closet.
No, I don't think so.
No.
So within the Anglican tradition, we have different seasons throughout the year. Mm-hmm. We've got Advent, we've got Christmas, we've got Epiphany, we've got Lent, Easter, and Pentecost. Those are the main ones. And each season has different colors associated with them. So if you go to an Anglican church during the Advent season, as part of the service, you will see cloths and hangings around the room that are colored blue. Sometimes they're purple or violet, but mostly now in the Anglican Church of Canada, the color is blue. And the color blue symbolizes penitence and hope, and which are the main features of the season of Advent. Those mm-hmm. are they kind of set the tone, no pun intended, quite literally, for the season. And so we use the candle colors have a similar significance. We have purple here. They can also be blue. Purple usually represents the same idea of a season of penitence, and but they also represent the royalty of the coming king. So mm-hmm. they're in the Anglican Church, we try to use colors, not just words, to call our attention to certain aspects of what we're experiencing and what our focus is. In a service, the priest will wear certain, they're called vestments, but it's just certain robes, pieces of attire that are each have their own significance for the work that they do and what they're trained to do. But they will wear different colors as well, and they'll change their vestments, based on whatever season of the church year they're in. So we've got these 3 purple candles, each representing the season of penitence, a little bit more somber, a little bit more preparation, as part of the 3 of the Sundays of Advent. But then for the 3rd Sunday of Advent, we get this rose-colored candle, and you'll see the color rose represented elsewhere in the room as well, the third Sunday. And that is because the third Sunday of Advent is kind of reserved for a little bit more of a season, the feeling of joy. So the third Sunday of Advent is commonly referred to as, I believe it's Gaudete Sunday, Gaudete being just a Latin word for rejoice. The point is, we've had a couple Sundays where it's a little bit more subdued, a little bit more somber. We're thinking a little bit more about, in a little bit more of a penitential or thinking a little more about repentance. But now the third Sunday, we get to kind of crank it up a little bit and reflect on the fact that while we're preparing for Jesus to come, we should take a certain posture towards that in terms of coming to that season with repentance, because ultimately there's a sense of unworthiness there. We can also be pretty excited about it. And this third Sunday of Advent gives us a kind of a chance to adopt that, and we'll hear it in the readings. We'll read it in the readings. Usually you hear it and see it in the songs that are chosen for that particular Sunday, and in the sermon that's spoken. They'll kind of tie those themes together. So that's why we have a different colored candle here. It's because it's trying to help us visually signal that we're kind of have a little bit of a different theme for this Sunday.
Yeah, and we'll even, during this Advent and Christmas season, we'll even sing a hymn called Gaudete, and it's all about this theme of it's about rejoicing. So that's another way you will see this signal of and referring or a reference to this rose candle and the theme of the week 3 of Advent. You mentioned these robes that priests will wear, and I know this isn't really connected totally specifically to Advent at all, but that was one of the things that I really didn't understand when I first started attending an Anglican church is, why does a priest wear these robes? Like, what is the purpose of it? Why do they have to? Why can't they just wear, a pair of slacks and a collared shirt or something?
Right.
Or whatever. So can you maybe speak just briefly to, like, why does the priest even wear these robes regardless of the colors? Like, what is the purpose of that?
So probably would be best for a actual ordained priest to be here to actually answer that question. I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah.
I think it's right, but disclaimer.
Yeah.
Could be corrected. My general understanding and take on it is that priests have a very important job. It's not that they're the only ones that can approach God or the only ones that could communicate to God for us, but they serve this very important role of a connection between the divine and with humanity. In many ways, they represent, to a certain extent, Christ in that sense. Not completely and totally, but as a kind of this figurehead within the church. And the robes, I believe, are designed to signal that particular role. But also, there's, as the priest puts on the different pieces of their vestments, they're called different things, but they've got kind of a robe underneath. They've got a little something that hangs around their neck called a stole. They've got a rope that goes around their waist, kind of like a belt. It's called something different. But all those different pieces have different prayers associated with them that the priest says as they put them on in order to prepare themselves for the important work that they're going to do. Typically, that means that the work that they're going to do is to prepare the people in their church and their parish to receive Eucharist. And when they do that, they are doing a very important sacred and solemn act, and they need to be properly attired to do that.
Yeah.
They need to be dressed right in order to prepare. Not that there's anything magical about these robes, that they're like they're special, and in what they symbolize. They are designed to kind of prepare the priest and to be something that they can approach the Eucharist table. There's this similar, back in the Old Testament, the priests, they had certain clothes that they wore. And the clothes were there to symbolize certain things and to not only their role within the community, but also in order to qualify to be able to approach the tabernacle, for example, or the presence of God. And I think that idea kind of carries over here in many ways, even if we don't quite feel it in the same way.
I think on a practical level, at least for myself too, how I've come to view the priest and these robes that they wear is it's a way that they can show that it's not important really who's behind the robes or what they're wearing. Because I think at least in my experience, and I think maybe for you as well, we've been to churches or we are familiar with maybe churches or pastors where it can kind of feel a little bit like a celebrity culture at times. Mm-hmm. And so there's this, I have definitely been to churches where I felt like I'm not dressed in the right way because of the people around me and maybe how the pastor is preparing himself or herself. And I think part of the value of these robes is to say, it's not about me. Mm-hmm. It's about what they represent, kind of the symbolism that you mentioned and what those things, what those parts of it represent. And you were talking about some of the prayers that they say to prepare as they put them on. Mm-hmm. So that's just something for myself that has kind of stuck out for me as I've learned.
And nothing about the Anglican Church, it's not immune to
celebrity culture.
Culture, historically, unfortunately, in the Church of England, where the Anglican Church of Canada has its roots, there was a lot of priests who abused their place of power.
Yeah.
And their incredible privilege because they were kind of little mini kings. Yeah. And they had a lot of power and control over the communities that they were in. And some of them, maybe many of them, abused that power. Mm-hmm. And we don't quite have the same thing now, but you can still have that. No one's immune to those celebrity features of whatever community you're in. So it's not that the Anglican Church has managed to subvert that or avoid it in any way, but because of the structure that's in place within the Anglican liturgy and the tradition, there's certain ways of maybe smoothing it out or making it a little less likely for celebrity culture to kick in, because you have much fewer opportunities to razzle dazzle, so to speak. But I think the vestments, the robes that a priest wears, it's okay to be confused by them and to have questions about it. Let me tell you, if anyone goes to an Anglican service and you want to go talk to the priest about what they're wearing, most of them love talking about it. And rightly so. They're very interesting. And there's lots of stories and histories about them. So don't be nervous. Don't be ashamed. I would love it if you went and talked to them about it. Because it's fun. When you get into it, most priests I've met are really quite down-to-earth people, and they just like talking about their, not to sound crass about it, their profession. Yeah. And it's an important part of what they do and who they are. So we realized after we had basically finished the episode that we went through the wrong readings for this year of Advent. We did the readings for year A of Advent rather than the readings for year B, and they are fairly different. So since we kind of liked what we had to say about the readings, we just chose to leave that discussion in there. I think it's still useful for you. I think it's still edifying for anyone listening to the podcast. But just to let you know, there's different passages for this year of Advent. And those are Isaiah chapter 61, verses 1-4 and verses 8-11, Psalm 126, or Canticle 18, and then 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 16-24, and then the Gospel of John chapter 1, 6-8, verses 6-8, and then verses 19-28. So if you want to go look at those passages to get ready for the Sunday service, feel free to do so and enjoy our little chat about the wrong readings for the right reasons. Thank you. So Trevor, we've got these readings for Advent 3. We've got this theme of joy. We've talked about our candle, and we've talked about how we're kind of preparing for Christmas, and we're kind of looking at this joy lens, through this joy lens. Wondering if you find it easy or hard to see the theme of joy within these passages. How have you kind of like walked through that when reading them?
Yeah, I think in reading these passages, it's quite evident the theme of joy in the Isaiah passage and then in the Psalm, less so in the New Testament and the Gospel passage. And I think that's just another reminder for us that we have to kind of work to find these connections, and it's okay to not get it right away and to take that time or spend a couple minutes to reflect a little bit on it. So I think what really strikes me in having read these passages, especially in the Isaiah one, I got this sense of life or joy, to use the theme, or newness kind of bursting forth. And it's much like how joy will kind of burst forth from us when we are truly happy about something. And I think the way that this idea or concept really jumped out at me in the Isaiah passage was the image of the deaf able to hear again, or the eyes of the blind being open, because our senses are such a strong thing that we have. And when we lose them, or in this case, when we regain them, it would be such I imagine, not having been in that position myself, but to regain sight or hearing would be such a powerful, joyful experience that I think it's a really great image that the writer of Isaiah chose to use here. And so, especially like in these mundane things that we might take for granted, like as people who haven't lost their hearing or their sight, we don't really think about what we lose when we don't have those things anymore. Yeah. So to regain something like that, that's quite a powerful image that really sticks out for me. And another thought that I had in reading these passages was just the sense of being able to rejoice in the lowly being lifted up, and the wicked being given their quote unquote just deserts. And that was something that was in our canticle reading for this week. And I think it's an obvious parallel to something we might feel today, whether, we have some kind of quarrel with someone, or we don't get along with a coworker or something. It can feel good to see that person maybe get their comeuppance. And that's not what the passage is about. It's not about revenge, but there is the sense in the Psalm and this canticle of like, yes, God has come through for me and given the wicked what they deserve, finally. So that was like what really obviously stuck out for me in the first two readings. And when I got to the New Testament and the Gospel readings, like I said.
Can I just pause here? So what is a canticle?
Yeah. I actually don't really know what that word means. Yeah. It was, do you know what the tradition is there? Because I'm not really actually sure.
In the Book of Alternative Services, so our green book here,
I believe it has to do with the word like song, if you go back into the Latin.
Yes. So essentially there's like an option in for this year of readings. Isaiah 61 is one of the readings, Psalm 126, or Canticle 18.
Yeah.
Canticle 18 is in this book.
Yeah.
And it's in a certain part here, and it's based on, I think it's the song that Mary sings.
Yeah, like the Magnificat.
In Luke 1:47-55.
Right.
So the canticle is not just a quotation of that verse, but it's using it to kind of create this song or poem that within the readings for this Sunday, instead of using the psalm, you have the option to say these words or sing this song as part of the readings. And so when we can choose either or, and the point is that we can use this song, this canticle, in place of the psalm to kind of as part of the readings. And it's not scripture itself, but it's based on aspect of scripture.
Yeah, and we've included both in for you this week.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say that when I got to the gospel reading, what I was able to connect it to is I see a through line or a thread that's going from the Isaiah passage that we have this week and last week with our message of, or our theme of peace. And there's a progression. So last week we had the Isaiah passage and then our gospel reading about preparing the way of the Lord and making the path straight. And then this week we have this gospel reading where John is in prison and he's sending out his followers to go find out if what he's hearing about Jesus is actually true. And this is a guy who's in prison and he's not feeling particularly hopeful or joyful, I imagine. And he's wanting to know if what he's been working towards and preparing as he's been, given the task to do is actually coming to fruition. And what Jesus tells his messengers is, yes, the lame walk, the blind can see, the deaf can hear. Go spread the word.
Yeah.
And so he's wondering if his joy at this rumor that he's heard can actually be confirmed. And Jesus is telling him yes.
He's telling him yes in the way that Jesus often says yes. Well, he doesn't ever say it.
Yeah.
He'll just be like,
look at the evidence.
What do you think?
Yeah, what do you think? Yeah.
So he asks these rhetorical questions. And really, I mean, it's kind of funny. Like in this gospel reading, like Jesus is kind of spicy. Like, what did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaking in the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal place. Like he kind of is trying to get people's attention, telling John and telling, most importantly, John's messengers and his audience. And just to remind everyone, I said this last show, I'll say it again. The people that Jesus is talking to, Isaiah is like it's like their Bible.
Yeah.
Like it's what is when they go to synagogue on the Sabbath, when they're thinking about when they're listening to teachers of Scripture talk, like the teachers of Scripture, they're talking about the first 5 books of the Bible mainly, especially the book of Deuteronomy, and they're leaning heavily on Isaiah all the time. And so when Jesus says these words, like sometimes we have a good reminder here that he's quoting this because we just read the Isaiah passage and then we see that, he's kind of using the same words. They seem to reflect each other. The people who was listening to him would have immediately heard that and been like, oh, he's talking about that passage. Yeah. Oh, I think he's saying that he's the person who's doing this. And this passage is all about restoration, the nature of the nation of Israel, bringing the people back to where they were supposed to be out of exile, redeeming them and bringing them back to the kingdom that they always wanted, the kingdom of God that they thought they were going to get when Moses brought them out of exile, out of the wilderness into the land of Israel. That's what they thought they were going to get. They kind of got it for a little while. Then it went away because they had a whole bunch of bad leaders that put them into, the pit of despair. And now Jesus is implicitly telling everyone, do you remember what Isaiah said? I'm the person who's going to do that. And they would have heard those words, and they would have immediately thought of and been, because they're steeped in the book of Isaiah, but they hear it all the time. And they're always thinking about, how do we get out from under the Romans? How do we escape this hell that we're in of being oppressed by another nation? We shouldn't be like this. It should be different. Looking for a time when it can be different. And Jesus very, very clearly talks about how he's going to be the person to do that. There's a writer. His name is Tom Wright. He usually authors his book as N.T. Wright, and he talks at a popular level. He's got lots of commentaries and lots of books on Christianity and faith. He's a former bishop in the Church of England, but he has a few very technical and academic books as well about kind of this lens that the people of the nation of Israel at the time of Jesus kind of had, and how they thought about their faith and their life and their nation, and how they kind of integrated with each other. It's basically worth reading almost anything that N.T. Wright has written, but helps to kind of set out the framework for what Jesus is saying here, and how in the lectionary readings, so the readings that the Book of Alternative Services and the Anglican Church of Canada have set out for us, we're tying that together. God says this in Isaiah about what's going to happen to the nation, how restoration is going to look, how quite frankly awesome it sounds, and then a little while later in Matthew, Jesus says, it's going to happen. I'm the man. But plays out in a little different way than that, unexpectedly. But I think tying those two things together is really quite powerful within these readings overall.
How does this idea or theme of joy resonate in your own life? Is it something that you find you can grasp onto in a meaningful way, or is it maybe something that you have a harder time with? Because we talked last week about like the theme of, or the idea of peace can be tricky when we're really busy. And we talked about having the busy family life, the work life. So how is it maybe different or similar with this idea of joy for you?
I think it's pretty similar in the sense that it's tough to, you have to kind of watch for the right times for joy, but also, joy in my own life happens in unexpected ways sometimes, and it's not something that you can anticipate. Like, there's going to a Taekwondo tournament with my boys, and they maybe they don't do really well, but they do something they hadn't done before. And they, compete in an event that they hadn't done before, and they feel like they worked really hard at it and they did really well at it, and they are really happy with that. This joy just kind of bubbles around that in a way that you maybe weren't expecting to, or whatever it is. So throughout the year, and it happens in unexpected ways, around Christmas time and in the season of Advent, it's pretty, especially with kids around, and family close by, it's pretty easy to kind of latch on to the joy once you kind of get through the busyness of the pre-Christmas Advent season. It can kind of catch you in unexpected ways. Yeah. Because it's easy to be happy, I think, around the Christmas season. How about you?
To speak a little bit personally, I think the last couple of years for my family have been quite challenging. Just some different things that we've had to face. So, and it's been right in this season or this time preceding Advent. So it's actually been really hard to feel joy. Yeah. So I find this a harder one to grasp onto. And I want to be careful, because I feel like I've said this in a similar way with the previous two themes about, it can be hard to, I have to work at this a little bit, right?
Sure. Doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong.
Exactly. But I think you mentioned how there are small moments, and you talked about taking your boys to a Taekwondo tournament and just seeing them accomplish something. So I can think of things like that for myself, like my daughter learning how to say some words, or learn new skills, because she's just got some delays there. And so just getting to see her do that that brings joy and excitement over what are really like small things. But for us, it's like a big thing. And I think when I'm not being too cynical about, my own work that I do with my students in my class, and I'm able to see, oh, like, hey, they're just really pumped about whatever it is. I teach 11-year-olds, and there's still this like really unbridled enthusiasm that they have for life that's quite infectious when you remember to let it excite you and bring joy to you. And I do really enjoy getting to be around that every day, pretty much. And sometimes often I have to remind myself that, you know what, I have to let that enthusiasm or that joy, that whatever it is, that has to be more important sometimes than whatever it is we're trying to do or the content, and just really lean into, wow, these kids are just full of love and excitement, and despite whatever, challenges they might have with what we're doing or their likes or dislikes for school, like, they're happy, they're excited to be here, and they are not afraid of showing that. And I think that's something you really get very organically with children, even up to that age, right? Especially when they're younger. But that's one of the great things about having kids, is it reminds you pretty frequently of those moments that you just lose as an adult because you're cynical and you get jaded and you get tired and life happens.
You can't fake joy.
No.
You can't fake it.
No.
It's either there or it's not. You don't get to like kind of halvesy it.
No.
By the way, whenever I hear the words unbridled enthusiasm, I think of Seinfeld, and Seinfeld brings me great joy. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Is the opposite of joy cynicism?
Maybe. It could be. I wonder if the opposite of joy might also just maybe not be cynicism, but also apathy.
Ooh, that's good. Could be.
Like I don't really care what it is.
Yeah.
So it could be cynicism, and I think cynicism could be tied to that.
Yeah.
I think I'm actually quite an optimistic person in a lot of ways, but it's easy to let cynical thoughts enter my mind. I feel like for myself, apathy is not one of those things that often comes in, which I'm thankful for.
Yeah.
Because that's a bad place to be for a long time.
Yeah. Or
any amount of time. But cynicism is definitely something that comes in for me sometimes. So, but I don't know. That's a good question. What do you think?
I mean, when I think about cynicism is the tendency to look at the negative part of any negative aspect of any situation, I would say.
Yeah.
To be not just being negative about it, like to expect the negative to occur.
Yeah.
It's like a pathological negativity,
right,
in a certain way, which I think if we think about joy being this unbridled enthusiasm, for example, or this just way of, this irrepressible, irresistible sense of happiness that you can't control or even anticipate. It might be the opposite of cynicism.
Yeah.
In that sense, which I don't know how useful it is to think about that stuff, but it helps to frame things, I think, in a certain way. Like I said, you can't fake it.
Yeah.
It happens or it doesn't. And I think if you give in to cynicism, you give in to the tendency to be cynical about things, eventually it'll be very hard for the joy to squeak through, because the pathologically negative thoughts will just douse it.
Yeah. And to give in to the cynicism is to give up on hope, and which leads to a lack of peace in your own life, right?
What did you think about the James passage? Like, I read this passage I was like, oh, I don't get it.
Yeah, I read it and it didn't really stick out to me the way the others did. Maybe I need to work harder at that one. But
fair enough.
Maybe that's my takeaway. But
Yeah.
The other ones were the connections in my mind came more organically for those. So I don't really know what to say about the James passage, to be completely honest with you. Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you want to make a comment telling us about what you think about the James passage, please feel free to do so. Educate us. Would love that.
Yeah.
Very sincerely. I'm sure there's something there. And one of the things to take away from this is if you feel like you got to work to see the theme in the passage, that happens. It's normal. Sometimes it's tied really clearly in. Sometimes it's just difficult to kind of get at. And that's a function of the fact that there's different passages that are trying to say different things. Sometimes you need a priest or someone who's a little bit more trained to come and say, like, actually, if you look at it from this direction, from this perspective over here, you can see how it ties in nicely. I love it when that happens. That's what makes usually what makes a great sermon and a great service. So you're not alone. I felt the same way when I read it. Didn't have any idea.
So Tyler, having read our Old Testament, our Psalm, Canticle, Gospel, Epistle readings for this week, what sticks out to you in terms of this theme of joy?
So what stuck out to me right away was it has nothing to do with joy, but we'll get there eventually. When I was, I remember when I was like 4 or 5 years old. No, a little older than that, maybe 6. I found this. Remember the Jesus movie? So there was this. I found this movie and I popped it into the VCR because that's what we had. We had a VCR, and I remember vividly in my mind's eye. The opening. I think it's the opening scene. You see John the Baptist walking through the River Jordan. And he's saying the words of Isaiah in Isaiah 61. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent us to bind the brokenhearted, proclaim freedom to the captives, etc., etc. And when I read this passage in Isaiah, I think, oh, that's talking about the person who's going to do all those things. And then in the gospel, there's a bit of a flip. It seems like, oh, John is kind of that person. And then he's kind of bringing on the other person who's going to do more things. And when I read that passage, I just vividly kind of go back to when I'm 6 and I'm sitting in the living room and watching that movie and kind of entranced by it in the ways that 6-year-olds are entranced by cool movies. And really appreciate kind of what this passage has to say about what eventually this deliverer person is going to be doing, how they're going to be doing it, and enjoy how the gospel kind of flips and who that person's going to be and the roles are. I think where the joy comes in, if we're gonna try and wedge it in there, because I think this passage is actually quite somber. Like it's not super pumped. The language overall, it really is thinking about something that really good is going to happen. Yeah, but in a way where it's kind of anticipating it and maybe kind of sad that it hasn't happened yet. But what's being anticipated, I think, is very significant in terms of, the history of the nation of Israel, the people of God, how Jesus's audience and John the Baptist's audience would have known this passage in and out, would have been primary source reading for them. Maybe not everyone in their society, but 80% of the people there would have been very attuned to this passage, and they would have been aware that we're kind of still waiting for this event to happen. Yeah, we're still oppressed. We've been under Babylonian rule. We've been under Persian rule. We've been under Greek rule. We've had the temple desecrated. Now we're under Roman rule. The hits just keep on coming. And when is there going to be a break? I thought this was happening. Yeah, and then we get to John the Baptist coming, and we get to Jesus, and there's this light of possible, this hope of joy that's been coming for a long time and been very frustrating to wait for. But maybe now we have these figures who are kind of trying to usher it in.
Yeah, this passage really, it's assuming a lot of heartbreak and despair.
Yeah, yeah.
Behind this message that is being shared or proclaimed of, hey, you do have something great coming. But I know that things really have been awful for you. And I think that's why this passage, the Isaiah one here, is really powerful for people who are oppressed more than people like you or me are, where we live and in our lifestyles that we have. But across other places in the world, when people can read that I have been sent to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the broken hearted, to liberate the captives, release prisoners, and it's the vengeance is the Lord's, that's a real hope that a lot of people can grasp onto when they have nothing else to really grasp. And the joy that can really inspire in people is very powerful. And I think we've seen how it's motivated people to do often really amazing things, but maybe even not in some instances.
I think that for the purposes of, thinking about the audience of the passage in Isaiah and current day, the idea of restoration, of true restoration, not just politically of the people of Israel and of the nation and of the people of God, but spiritual restoration, emotional restoration, in the true sense, where you're fully brought back to a place that is where you're supposed to be.
Yeah,
is maybe the root of maybe all joy.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Like it's very, and Isaiah is really tying those two things together. It doesn't and then we get to the passage in the Gospel of John, which has lots to say about John the Baptist, and he makes it very clear to those who he is speaking to who he is and who he is not.
Yeah.
And this, we talked about how everyone in Jesus' day and John the Baptist's day would have been very aware of this Isaiah passage. For all intents and purposes, John is calling everyone's mind back to Isaiah and what they have to say, and making it very clear, like, okay, he's kind of embedding himself within the history of the nation of Israel, which involves what the promises and the statements that are in Isaiah 61. And he's telling everyone, the Pharisees who had been sent questioned him, "Why then do you baptize if you are not the Messiah, nor Elijah, nor the prophet? I baptize with water," John replied, "but among you stands one you do not know. He is the one who comes after me, the straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie." This all happened at Bethany on the other side of the Jordan, where John was baptizing. So John is kind of embedding himself within this restoration story in a way that would have been, I think, pretty clear to the people he was speaking to, and kind of setting us up for, the one that's going to come. And, being in the season of Advent, that's what we're doing. We're getting ready for the one that is to come.
Yep.
And John is the Gospel of John. The writer of the Gospel of John is different from John the Baptist, as far as we know. The Gospel writer is helping to prepare us to kind of get there.
And to connect these readings to the Psalm as well, you were talking a little bit about how in the Isaiah passage specifically, and even in that John one you were just speaking of, that there's this expectation of restoration to something that existed in the past or that we want to get back to. And that Psalm reading, the Psalm passage, starts by saying, "The Lord has done great things for us. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, then we were like those who dream." And that's calling the reader's attention to a condition that existed in the past that they're trying to get back to. Yep. And Isaiah is talking, the writer of Isaiah is talking about restoration to that condition that was in the past.
Yeah.
John is saying, look, I am here to help you prepare for this person, the Messiah, who is going to restore you to this condition that we want to get back to.
Yeah.
And so that's one of these things that's helping us to connect all of these passages, I think, together. Mm-hmm. And the only one we haven't really talked about yet is the epistle, the reading from Thessalonians. Do you want to say a little about that?
The first words of the passage: rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. For this,
Tyler, this reminds me of did you ever sing the song in youth group growing up? Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Do you know that one?
I do.
That's what I think of when I read that line.
Yes, absolutely. It hits you right there.
Yep.
This is pretty classic. Paul writing and just kind of giving these people just a list of like, this is what you do, this is how you do it, do this, and it's vintage Apostle Paul sort of thing, and he, there's not a lot of connection here, I don't think, to the other readings necessarily, which is fine. They don't always have to be integrated with themselves, but really kind of helps us to frame, we have, this is the chance in the Lenten season, the Advent season to pause, get away from maybe the more penitential, somber season, and to remember that we have something we're expecting something in just 2 short Sundays here, even sooner than that. We're going to be celebrating the birth of Jesus, and that there's good reason to be joyful about that, good reason to feel lots of optimism and joy towards that coming season.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's hard to interpret tone from a 2,000-year-old text, but I think when I read this passage, I hear Paul kind of telling his readers, the people he is writing to, like, he's not being harsh. He's not being like, you need to change, you stupid people. Like, what are you doing? That's not what he's doing here. He's saying, hey, he's saying, like, be better. Like, you are God's people, so rejoice always. Pray without ceasing. Give thanks. Like, it's an encouraging admonishment, and it's a little bit of an admonishment in a way.
Yes.
But it's an encouraging one, and it's an enthusiastic one. So it's that joyful kind of be better, almost, in a sense.
This statement in here that says, do not treat prophecies with contempt, but test them all. I am very guilty. Well, let's think of prophecies here. I think what Paul is really talking about is not we think of prophecy in terms of people standing up and trying to tell the future.
Sure.
That's not what Paul's talking about here. Prophecies would be more commonly used to refer to just like preaching, like people telling others what they think the scriptures are saying and what right living is. I am definitely guilty of, when I listen to prophecies in what we just talked about in that sense, holding many of them in contempt and just not testing them. And I it's a very instructive word here. I think it's a better way to live. And he's not saying just believe them.
Yeah.
He's just saying, give them a fair shake. Like, if you disagree with it, that's cool. But do it thoughtfully. Don't just write it off because, you said that and someone else said that. And I just don't agree with that because I've no real rational concept just because you're just writing it off. And I think that's a very helpful reminder, especially during the Christmas Advent season, when you can hear a lot of things about what we do and why we do it and why we believe certain things, and give it a fair shake. It might not be a long one, but do it.
I think this passage could be an equally applicable passage for hope, peace, or joy, because it mentions all of these things.
Of course.
Right? Like,
very Pauline.
Totally. Like, it ends with the one who calls you is faithful and he will do this. Like, that's hope. Or in the middle, it's the God of, may the God of peace himself sanctify you entirely. Right? Like, it's a great kind of letter or passage to have right in the middle in this third week of Advent, even though our theme is joy and we can read it through that lens, but to remind us of what we've kind of talked about leading up to this Sunday.
Yeah. Feedback is very important to us. We like putting a lot of thought into this Pray Tell podcast. We like being curious and thinking carefully about what we do. And if you have any comments or directions or questions, anything that you want us to cover, anything that we say that is weird or a word we use where you're like, what does that mean? Put it in the comments below. Send us a note over social media. Our social media handles will be in the description. Let us know what you think, and then we can address it on another episode or talk about it at some point. So please feel free to reach out, and we welcome your thoughts and questions and queries that you might have.
Yeah. So thank you again for joining us this week as we discussed the theme of joy for Advent 3. And we really just hope that the next week, that your week will be filled with joy, and you can take some time to reflect on that theme and how you can find that present in your own rhythm of life. And so from all of us at St. Matthew, for Tyler, for myself, we just hope you enjoyed this episode, and we hope you'll join us next week when we discuss love for Advent 4. And we just hope you continue to enjoy a great Advent season wherever you are, whether it's Abbotsford or abroad, elsewhere. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.